Thank you. I'll do that again. We'll call to order this special meeting of the Los Altos City Council this evening on Tuesday, August 30th at 5:32 p.m. Would City Clerk please establish quorum?
Happy to, Mayor. Members of the council, if you are here, please indicate so by answering in the affirmative. Councilmember Flagger.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Lee Ang.
Here.
Thank you. Councilmember Weinberg.
Yes.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Meadows.
Here.
Thank you. Mayor Enander.
Here.
Thank you, Mayor. All members are present. You have a quorum.
So at this special meeting, we have two items. The first is to conduct interviews for vacancies on our commissions. And the second is to review and potentially approve sending a letter to the County of Santa Clara regarding Stanford University. We will take up item 1 first, and there is an order in our packet of interviewees. Our plan is to interview for 10 minutes with a 5-minute break in between. So we're going to let the city clerk call names and keep time for us. I don't expect you to put a timer up, just to keep track and help prompt us to keep us on track, city clerk.
Will do.
For those who are currently present, the way we usually do this is we ask you to give us a very short summary of why you are applying for the commission. We then invite any one or more of our city council members to ask you questions. We give you a chance then at the end to ask any questions you have of us, and then we go to the next interview.
Mayor,
Yes.
any public comment?
No, and it's not called for the agenda in the agenda, and I cleared that with the city attorney.
Okay.
So city clerk, go ahead and call our first interviewee, please.
Yes, I was looking for him. Mike. Last name I'm gonna probably butcher, but I don't see him on our panelist list right now. I'm clicking over to the attendee side. Don't see him there either. Steven. I did receive confirmations from everyone. So everyone should be here.
Okay, because I currently see 2 people on the panelist side. Do we know who on the attendee side, who is on the phone number that ends 7267?
I can allow them to speak and then we can see if they can address us.
Just in case that's one of our interview panelists.
Caller that ends with the number 7267. Are you happen to be an applicant for the commission this evening?
Hello. No, I'm not an applicant.
Okay, thank you very much. We just wanted to make sure. All right, that being the case, I suggest we move to the second.
The second person on our list is also.
There's another one on the attendee side, Mayor, that we don't know. It's a Zoom user.
Zoom user, you're right. Let's check with Zoom user on the attendee side.
Let's see. Hello, Zoom user. Are you happen to be an applicant for tonight's meeting? He's not muted.
Apparently not.
Recording in progress.
I don't know why twice in recording since the beginning.
Okay, if we weren't recording. All right, let's ask the user to mute again if you're, thank you. City Clerk, if we didn't have a recording going, do I need to go back and start the meeting over and call roll again?
No, Madam Mayor, I did start the recording from the beginning. I'm unsure why it announced it a second time.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go back to panelists and let's then move to the Design Review Commission.
Okay, I see Stuart Klein on the panelist side, which I believe is the first one in accordance to our interview schedule that's here. Would you like to chat with him?
Yes, let's begin with Mr. Klein, please. And thank you for being early so that we can do this.
Well, sometimes it happens.
And I don't know if you were here when I said the way we usually do this is we give you a minute or so to tell us why you want to be on the commission. And then one or more council members may ask you questions. Then we'll give you a chance to ask us questions and close the discussion. We usually take about 10, 12 minutes most. So
Sure.
please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, my name is Stuart Klein, and I'm applying both for the Design Review Commission and the Planning Commission. I'd like to serve on one of these two commissions really for three simple reasons. The first is I have some useful skills to offer to the city. I've had a long career in both law and in finance, and I have 25 years of real estate experience with several large community projects, in particular senior housing, a school, and not one but two community centers, including the Los Altos Community Center. I was on the Citizens Task Force for that. So I have some useful skills to offer. The second reason is I love Los Altos. I've lived here for 30 years, raised a family here. Kids went to public schools, played Little League. So I know the town well and love it. And the third reason is I have the time. I'm semi-retired at this point in my life, and I know I can work hard and learn all the rules and do a good job.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. I'm now going to turn to my colleagues, and I'm just going to pick a rotation and go through the rotation. And if you want to pass, that is perfectly acceptable. I'm going to go first to Mr. Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Klein, for applying. My mother lived at the Molda, so I'm very familiar with that community center, and thank you for your work there as well. If you could, very briefly, in what ways do you think either or both the Planning Commission and the Design Review Commission could be improved?
Well, I'm familiar more with the Planning Commission than Design Review, but I think the improvement that I'm aware of would have to do with becoming familiar with the new legal landscape. By that, I'm talking about the housing mandates that have come from Sacramento and a couple of the new laws regarding lot subdivisions and so on. And that's a lot of new material to learn, and a lot of challenge to apply it to Los Altos in a way that's wise and helpful. So kind of helping both commissions master that, I think, is the biggest challenge.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Good to meet you, Mr. Klein, albeit virtually. So I'm going to mention something we didn't mention at the top of the interview, so I think it's worth mentioning to candidates tonight is, council will be looking at commission structures and remits, et cetera, probably in the coming months to years. So any appointments will probably need flexibility. So depending on what council decides to do with structure and remit, as I mentioned. So Given that, if you were appointed to one of the commissions and then the nature of that commission's changed, say 6 months from now, I realize this is a hypothetical. How would you deal with that? Pragmatically, emotionally, or fill in the blank with any manner of choice?
Sure, I'm a pragmatic, flexible, get it done kind of person. So if the landscape changes, I'll change with it.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, Councilmember Lee Eng.
I wanted to thank you for taking the time to volunteer again for our city and appreciate it. So I wanted to ask, have you looked at our zoning codes and do you feel that they are adequate? If yes, then you can explain why you think they're adequate. And if not, what would you change?
Sure. So yes, I have looked at the zoning codes and I also looked at the housing element study as well. And first comment is Los Altos is not broken. It works very well. So I don't see any need for any radical kind of change. Second comment would be kind of the next level down. There are some items of concern. The downtown, there's some empty storefronts. And so maybe it lacks a little bit of vibrancy. Sherwood Triangle needs improvement. Loyola Corners, same thing, it's dated. So on the margin, I think there are ways to improve the commercial districts. And then I think the other piece is the housing element, because as I understand it, at least from looking at the reports, there's about 1,500 units of housing that need to be permitted somewhere. And so figuring out where those go and creating kind of a win-win environment where those housing units enhance the commercial districts and make use of rapid transit, so on. I think those are all real opportunities.
Thank you.
Great. And Councilmember Flyer.
Thank you, Mayor, and hi, Stuart. Hi, Mr. Klein. Thanks
Hi.
for applying to 2 different commissions. And as Councilmember Liang said, really appreciate your interest in continuing to serve Los Altos. I have a follow-up on I was actually going to ask about the 2 applications, but I want to follow up on the housing element question. Stuart, have you watched any of the meetings? I know you review the documents, but even from reviewing the documents, anything that you would change or question about the process? I'm trying to take advantage of an outsider looking at the documents. Anything that caught your attention?
Well, short answer is no. I thought it was a very thorough process. Sought input in all kinds of ways over a long period of time. So I think the process was pretty good. And I think at the highest level, the conclusions make a lot of sense. Focus on the commercial thoroughfares, try to supplement the downtown to keep it vibrant, maybe do something with a parking plaza. I think, I think it made sense, and I don't have any great way to improve it. I think it was a good process.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll finish up by saying, picking up on the 1,500 additional units that we need to find a place for. Do you have any ideas about smart ways to place those in those commercial areas and still protect the adjacent single-family homes where there are single-family homes that may back up to or be adjacent to what some of those properties would be?
Boy, you all give me the easy questions.
No, you've shown you know them so much, you get a hard one now.
I think it's a facts and circumstances kind of thing. Each piece of property is unique, and the physical realities and the sound issues and the view corridor issues and all that, I think you have to evaluate one parcel at a time. It's a very difficult situation. You have people who bought here houses over 50 years and never dreamed 1,500 units of new housing would come in a decade. So, somebody's expectations are not going to be met here.
So do you have any questions for us?
Just maybe one. I know both commissions are advisory commissions, and we're to advise the city council. So I was just curious if city council is getting what it needs from the two commissions, or how could the commissions help the city council do its job better?
Well, I'm going to answer that by saying right now, I think, or over the course of the last few years, we found both of those commissions are kind of standing on semi-liquid jello, because the legislature, as you pointed out, has passed a number of laws that are changing basically what those commissions' roles will be. And that's one of the reasons why the vice mayor alluded earlier to kind of a rethink on how we're going to do this. It's being driven by more than 70 pieces of legislation over the last 4 or 5 years that alter what the role of the Planning Commission is allowed to be and is required to be under law, and what the role of the Design Review Commission is allowed to be under law. So it's part of the
to be continued.
To be continued, exactly. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for joining us. Any final thing you want to say?
No, just I'm very excited to serve again if it works out.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being here to be our first interviewee.
You're welcome.
Good evening.
Good.
Okay, we technically have a minute before our next interview is scheduled to start. I still don't see interviewees 1 through 3. I do see interviewee 5, Urvashi, that's here as a panelist. We can take him on now, or if you guys like a couple minutes to discuss, we can do that as well.
We usually don't discuss our interviewees during the course of the interviews. We usually do that, if at all, at the end. So let's see, have we verified that we don't have anybody parked over the attendees that wants to come over and be a panelist?
Yeah, I've been clicking
Like
back and
same
forth.
group, hasn't changed.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so let me just say to Mr. Negrani, we appreciate your being here early, because we've had at this point some people who have been scheduled that we haven't seen yet. Would it be okay with you if we went ahead
Definitely.
and started your interview now?
Happy to do so.
Oh, great.
Mayor,
All right, so the way
Mayor,
we do this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mayor, point of order, sorry to interrupt. I know in the past when applicants have not arrived at their scheduled time, we've had the clerk send an email or do a phone call. Can we check if Angel is doing that?
Sure. Angel, have you tried to be in communication with any of our so far missing 3 folks?
Not since we started, but I'm going to start sending them emails right now.
Okay, and I'll note that technically our 3rd listed panelist is not late in that they would be 15 minutes from now, but our first 2 are of some concern. So if you'd check with those 2 first, that would be great.
Yes.
All right, Ms. Negrani.
Hello.
Let me just give you a little bit of brief. What we usually do is ask you to spend a little bit of time, minute or so, just to summarize why you are applying. We, of course, have your application that we've all read. And then we'll ask the city council, 1 or more at their option, may ask you questions. And then we'll ask you whether you have any questions for us and give you a chance for kind of a final statement. So
Sounds
we
great.
hope that that takes 10, 12 minutes or thereabouts. So if you want to start with a little intro.
Yeah, so my name is Urvashi Negrani. I also go by Urvi. And I am definitely a local of this area. I was born at Mountain View Hospital. I grew up in unincorporated Santa Clara County land, but right in Los Altos on our mail. And I think a few years back, it technically became Los Altos Hills. It's that little slice just right by Magdalena and 280. So I've always been in that sort of space in between the cities. My parents bought the home that I'm currently speaking from back in 1986. I was born about a year later, so very much a Los Altos resident. I've biked most of these streets growing up. I've walked most of these streets growing up. This year, I started the year working over at PowerFlex, a company that's based in the downtown area on First Street. My first job was over at the Starbucks on Main Street. Used to attend college at Foothill, so I'm definitely quite familiar with this area, getting around on car, foot, bike, electric bike, not so much by bus. We don't really have many bus options. So I'm sure that if we try to do a more transit first thing to align with the California scoping goals, that could change in the future. But I think for me, one of the things is that it's been a sad thing to see over the last roughly 2 decades that a lot of the friends that I grew up with have been forced to move out of Los Altos. And some folks have wanted to put ADUs on their properties and haven't been able to, trying to kind of create mechanisms for either grandparents or kids to move back. And so I think a lot of people of my generation have an interest in seeing how development is done in the city, being done in a way that creates rooms for families to grow, because otherwise you sort of get a stagnation. And, you know, the property that I grew up on was once split into 2 and is now 2 full-sized houses, and that was done back in the 80s. And the result of that is, you know, great neighbors we've gotten to know over the years. And so I'd love to be in a position where I can think about how do we thoughtfully design the future to kind of preserve the best of Los Altos and that sort of green, walkable, accessible to the pathways, trails, but also creating room for people to come in and enjoy our great schools, jobs, being biking distance to everything in Silicon Valley.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will do a little rotation here and ask the Vice Mayor Meadows go first. Do you have a question for our applicant?
Sure. First of all, and I'm going to change this to just a statement up front. As I mentioned earlier, you may not have heard it. We will be looking at the remits and potentially the structure of commissions over the next X months. And so we beg your flexibility if you do get appointed to a commission. So my question would be, so you're applying for Design Review Commission, and what do you understand the remit of that commission to be, and what would you bring to it?
So I think Los Altos has a very interesting sort of design structure in some ways, just because as a town, it was created sort of piece by piece. And so there's a little bit of diversity, but there's also sort of similar design ethos. You know, you see that if you go downtown, it's not big chain stores, it's very walkable, it's pedestrian friendly. And, you know, things like preservation of trees, having a nice line so that each property kind of seamlessly blends together while at the same time is visually distinct. And so I think, you know, especially with all the state rules having changed recently, there is, you know, by right housing building that can happen if you do not create processes that allow for building in a measured way at the same rate. And so I think part of what the Design Commission is eventually going to have to do along with the Planning Commission is figure out how do we make Los Altos feel like Los Altos while growing to include more Los Altons. And I think the Design Commission gets to have a nice part of that conversation. And I think there's been examples of really good design through the city and nearby, you know, with Foothill College, when they did an expansion on the campus with new buildings for the bio department, they used integrated green landscaping to be drought tolerant, well insulated, as well as preserve some of the wilderness access on campus. Those kinds of things can make the town still feel like it's integrated into the environment while at the same time allowing for new construction. And I think that balance is something that would make existing residents happy and also enable new residents to come in and get the same sort of features and really enjoy what the town has to offer.
Thank you. Councilmember Lee Eng.
Thank you, Urvashi. One quick thing before I ask my question is Spalding in the county part of Los Altos, or is it, because
It's technically one block into Los Altos Hills.
so is, I'm asking, is that county area then?
It used to be. It no longer is.
Oh, so did we, did it get,
It
what
got
is it?
technically annexed into Los Altos
Oh,
Hills.
okay. it
For a
did get
long time, there was a
annexed in?
dispute about whether it should go because that little like couple block area, the blocks are under an acre size. And so Los Altos Hills didn't want it for a long time. And Los Altos didn't want to go across the freeway. So it's in that little area, technically now Los Altos Hills. But, you know, having worked in Los Altos, I applied anyways, and just to see if that mattered too much with the sort of one block difference.
Okay, so I guess I'm not clear if that's county.
And what she's
Have we-
saying is it's now
Did
part
we-
of incorporated Los Altos Hills.
It's the
Yes,
hills,
it's
not
very
the city.
recently.
Okay,
So she
then-
is a legal resident of Los Altos Hills is
okay,
my, is
thank
what
you.
I think I'm
That
hearing.
clarifies it for me.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then I was previously also working in downtown Los Altos, so most of the sort of professional ties have been in Los Altos, but yes, the house is in Los Altos Hills now.
Okay.
Still write
Thank
Los
you for
Altos
the
on our mail and it arrives here though.
Thank you for the clarification. Greatly appreciate it. I'm good. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Fliger.
So I'm going to pass because I do think we have an outstanding question. Urvashi, thank you so much for applying. I've enjoyed listening to you. I enjoyed reading your application. But I imagine the mayor may need to check with the city attorney to see if you can serve on one of our commissions, since legally you're not a Los Altos resident. And I don't know for a fact whether or not non-Los Altos residents can serve on our commissions. But for now, I'm going to pass and ask a question, but thank you so much.
All right.
Okay, and similarly, I'm going to go ahead and ask a question, but with the understanding that we do, with both the Planning and Design Review Commission, I will need to talk with our city attorney about, there are some commissions we have where we have had and can have people who are not residents of the city, but I need to verify with respect to specifically design review and planning commissions, whether that's the case. But so I'm going to ask you a design review commission question anyway. And that is, you're aware obviously that there's going to be construction planning for expansion, new homes and multifamily homes.
Yes.
So since you're very familiar with the downtown, one of the plans is to put homes on, for example, San Antonio Road. We already have a number of multifamily homes on El Camino, for example.
Yep.
What do you think is important for how we can protect the privacy and interests of the people who have single family homes that are abut what are going to be multifamily developments?
Yep. So I think there's a couple of things you can do to make these sort of seamlessly fit together, because I think sometimes if you look at both Los Altos and Los Altos Hills, there are buildings here that if you were to look at San Francisco, same square footage would be, you know, a duplex or a fourplex in San Francisco and would be a single family home. And so you can use some of the same design elements to look visually pleasant and have those live alongside each other. But I think another thing that's really important is to think about things like sound isolation and also how to make sure that when people are moving around each other, there's space. So things like making sure that the driveways have clear visuals so that you don't have, you know, a kid playing and they're at risk of getting hit by a car and more cars going in. Those sorts of things where you think about visibility and line of sight for how traffic moves and how mobility happens. But then on the flip side, in your backyards, you want to think about line of sight being disrupted. You want more trees. You might want some hedges. You might want to think about, you know, we have different standards, for example, for fence sizes when they're next to the street versus in the backyard, so that those kinds of things can be managed. And I think especially when you're thinking of perhaps taller buildings, you would want to think about things like that. You know, in New York, sometimes they have airways in the middle of apartment buildings to make sure that you can have windows, light, and flow, but still a little bit more sound privacy. I think those kinds of design elements could have a place in a multifamily housing where perhaps balconies overlooking a central courtyard as opposed to balconies facing outward where you might be looking into somebody's backyard.
Thank you. Councilmember Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Urvashi, for applying. In what ways do you think the DRC can be improved?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. In what way or ways do you think the DRC can be improved?
I think a lot of people, when they hear any review process, tend to get hung up because if there aren't clear standards, and for example, in Los Altos, there's a guide that says, you know, we want it to have some originality. Here's what downtown looks like, but it's not as cut and dry of, okay, if you choose blue, it's going to get approved. It's not sort of a product description per se. It's a general vibe. And there's a lot of people who get nervous about that because they don't know if it's going to be consistent or fairly applied, if there's going to be racial biases based on who's presenting, and they don't necessarily know how long it'll take. And so I think one of the things that can be done is the council can basically make a process guide of when we look at a project, this is how we will think about it. This is your expected timeline from paperwork being submitted to review. This is your point of contact if you feel you are not being heard, and kind of speaking to those fears up front. Because if there's a lot of projects that are happening in a short amount of time, people are always worried that their project is going to get left behind. And that can make them sort of less trusting of all processes in general. So I think transparency is sort of the thing that you can offer to make it easier.
Thank you. So do you have any questions for us other than the obvious one, which is, can we even appoint you?
Yeah.
Which we will answer quickly and get back to you by tomorrow, I'm sure. Speaking of being responsive and giving answers.
I would love to know how the design committee is going to be thinking about things like the integration of solar, electric vehicle charging, heat pumps and other external sort of HVAC systems, and if those sorts of retrofits to improve our climate adaptability are also considered within design, or if those things are sort of by right building. Because I could see, for example, if everybody in the town gets new HVAC units outside their house, it could change the look. But at the same time, we want people to have pleasant climate controlled living spaces. So I'd love to know how the town is thinking about sort of adapting to climate change in those ways.
I'm going to answer that in two ways. One is to say we have staff responsibility for working on a lot of that. And we also have opportunities and constraints presented by our state legislature, and the building codes and the new building codes as they get changed, and what we decide to do with respect to reach codes and so on. All of those will definitely affect to what extent or whether the design review commission gets involved in those issues specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely good to know. I think there's some definite opportunities for example, EV chargers having lighting near them if they're publicly available makes a huge difference to both usability and reduction of things like graffiti on the sites. You know, EVs is the space I've been working for the last decade. And so I've seen some examples of great infrastructure and bad infrastructure. And a lot of times it boils down to how thoughtfully designed was the site.
Right, right. Well, thank you very much for joining us this evening, and we will be in touch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay.
I have a few updates for the council here. So I've reached out via phone to Mike and left him a voicemail, no connection. So I'm hoping, I invited him to join if he can while we're still here. Stephen, our second applicant of this evening, he reached out to my colleague Adelina at 1 p.m. to inform her that he has withdrawn his application and canceling his RSVP for tonight's interview. So that at least gives me an answer for applicant number 2.
Right.
So, Mayor, may I ask,
Go ahead. Yes,
clarify who's withdrawn? It's number 2.
Number
Yes.
2, Stephen,
Okay.
Steve Broxson.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, and it's now 6:06. Do we have Mr. Mantica with us?
And I do not see Mr. Mantica here.
He was in participants just a moment ago. I mean,
Okay.
in attendees, I saw.
And he's there. Thank you, Vice
Yes.
Mayor.
Yay.
I'm promoting him now. Mr. Mantica, you're getting a pop-up on your screen. I'm promoting you to a panelist. I need you to accept it. There we go. You're on the right side. Yeah, perfect. You should be able to unmute yourself and start your video at this point.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
For joining us.
Thank you for this opportunity. I've been looking forward to it.
We're happy to have you, and we'll tell you how this goes.
Sure.
We give you first a minute or so to summarize why it is you want to serve on the commission. And then we take a little round robin with the council so that they can each ask you a question, or they can choose to pass. Then give you a chance to ask us any questions that you have, and then sum up anything that you want to say in conclusion. We usually take 10-12 minutes to go through that.
Sure.
And I'm going to save the vice mayor her usual speech, which is partly because of changes with state law. We are likely to be making some changes in the coming months or a year, maybe sooner, hopefully, in what we're doing between the Design Review Commission and the Planning Commission. So we want to be upfront with you that there may be some changes coming, and some of that is unpredictable and depends to some extent on what the state legislature is doing.
It sounds fun.
So that sounds like fun. So take it away. It's all yours, Mr. Mantica.
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be here and having this opportunity to tell everybody that I've been living in Los Altos for the past 4 years. When I moved to California, I have 3 kids. They all go to Los Altos schools. They go to Egan, Santa Rita, and Los Altos High. My God, they've grown so fast. And in the meantime, the last 4 years, I've been designing residential architecture here in mostly in Los Altos and Los Altos Hills as well. Some other parts of Silicon Valley, like Menlo Park, Saratoga, Cupertino. So it's been great. I mean, 80% of my projects are here in Los Altos, and they're basically I've been to 4 design review commissions in the past 4 years. They've all been, kind of stressing to prepare for them, just to either defend a point or just kind of like to be prepared for anything, neighbor, from a neighbor's point of view or from the commissioner's point of view. It's always been cool. I've always wondered how it would be like to be on the other side. So it would be interesting for me to see, with my 20 years of design experience on architecture, see if there would be anything that I can contribute to Los Altos. I would be more than happy to do so. And if this is the opportunity to do it, then so be it. I have no idea what a commissioner does, but you can probably all instruct me in the next 10 minutes. So I have more questions than answers right now, but basically, yeah, I'm eager, I'm curious, and got a lot of trajectory behind me, a lot of design trajectory behind me. So, be more than happy to contribute anything that I can.
Great. Thank you very much. Let me
Sure.
start with Councilmember Lee Eng. Do you have a question for our applicant?
Yes, thank you for your interest in serving on one of our commissions.
Sure.
So how many, let me double check, I need to double check, how many commission meetings you have attended? And
I've attended 4, I've participated in 3.
okay, as a just interested constituent, or because you had projects in front of them?
As an architect, yeah.
Okay, and then the other thing is, so how familiar are you with our, so obviously you're familiar with our building codes or
Yes.
zoning codes.
Very.
What do you think is good? And if it's good as it is, or if you think it should be changed because you think there's room for improvement? Can you share your thoughts on that?
Maybe on flag lots, that certain rules shouldn't apply as much as let's say corner lots. I think they're totally different projects in nature. A double front lot or a corner lot is visible from many angles. flag lot is almost not visible from anybody. So sometimes I've had to deal with flag lots, and they're very limited, like saying you can only do 1 story and with a basement and stuff. So I understand the whole privacy things that they're trying to avoid, the whole privacy issues they're trying to avoid with its surrounding neighbors that have been there for a very long time. Erecting a home of 2 stories, there's limitations, and I understand that fully, but there's maybe not limited to 2 stories, but somehow limit the way in which the windows are designed or oriented in a way that maybe not limited to 1 story, but maybe have the possibility of qualifying a certain with certain other criteria, privacy criteria, to be flexible on those. That's just one that occurs to me. But other than that, zoning codes around here, you know, they're pretty straightforward. I like them because I've gotten to know them really well. And ADU rules came into effect about, oh my God, has it been 2 years now? Was it 2020? Oh my God. So it feels like yesterday. But I know you've adopted your own ordinance, which is now good. You used to use the San Jose one. So all those little things have been coming down to a little bit more of a ordered way of doing things, which I like. At the beginning, it was a little bit more chaotic in that sense. I don't know if you guys remember, but there's everybody trying to do ADUs and 16-foot heights, and Los Altos was like, wait a minute, I put a 16-foot height at 4 feet away from my property, and it was craziness. So it's good that you started regulating all that. So little things like that. I don't know if I would change anything, but probably be lenient on certain things. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Councilmember Flagger.
Thanks, Mayor.
Oh.
Is it Chepe? Can you pronounce your first name again, Mr. Mentica?
Okay, so it's a nickname for Giuseppe. It's Italian for Jose. So
okay.
So it's Chepe. It's easier. It's catchy. I don't think anybody else is called Chepe. So in a way, it's an opportunity to be more unique around this area. So and everybody asked me how to spell it or how to pronounce it. So you're not the first one.
Right. So I want to go back to your deep experience in architectural design.
Yeah.
And do you have, I think it's 20 plus years, do you solely focus on single family homes, or do you have experience with multifamily developments as well?
So in Central America, I used to do institutional, what's it called, commercial, residential, and industrial. So I've done a lot of projects. I used to work a lot on mall developments, strip mall developments, supermarkets, in industrial navs for what's it called, duty free zones. I've done a lot of modern architecture, a lot of beachfront homes, a lot of cliffside homes.
You've done a lot, Chepe. Mr. Mentica, you've done. And the reason I'm asking, I'm sure you're familiar with our planning commission as well. I'm curious why you chose design review commission and maybe not the planning commission.
It's keep me in the loop of everything that's going on, the trends that have been going on and what's molding our community, what's molding our society and stuff. So it's kind of like being a little bit more part of the community where I live in. And it's just been Sean Gallegos. I've been working with him for the past 4 years and stuff. And he was he was just telling me that there's a DRC, what's it called, a position opening up as a commissioner. Would you be interested? I was like, why not? Let's see what it's all about. Why not? So I don't know. I guess for the prestige of it, it'll be great to work with peers and colleagues that just have a ton of experience that I can learn from, and it would be just great if there's anything that I can contribute that would be to the community. That would be so great.
Thank you.
Make me feel valued here. It'd be good.
Always a good thing. So thank you for applying, and thank you for wanting to serve our community.
All right. You're welcome.
Thank you much. And the question I have for you is, we're going to face a dilemma, and this is a kind of a planning commission and design review commission type of question. But under the housing element, we're being asked to plan for 1,958 units to be built over the next 8 years, which is as many as have been built in the last 30 in our town. So whether or not that actually happens, we still have the opportunity to plan for how we want it to happen. And my question to you is, since you've worked in multifamily and commercial and single family, when you're placing multifamily housing, principally as we would probably do, at least, and that's how our draft housing element is written now, in commercial quarters, there are nevertheless areas where it backs up to single family homes. What kinds of standard, and this is the tricky part, standard techniques, because the legislature requires us to do things as objective standards, not on a case-by-case basis. What kind of objective standards can we use to help assure the privacy of those single-family homes when they're abutting in some way new multifamily housing?
First, we'd have to designate these areas to particular zoning where you have a little bit more of a, if you're going to go multifamily, you're probably going to go for something a little bit more open, somewhere where with less surroundings. I know that parks are pretty sacred, but maybe orienting these structures for multifamily living, maybe abutting places, open spaces like parks, like open areas, like just to mitigate at least one or the two sides of the front that don't have to deal with privacy issues or invading somebody else's privacy. It's just a little bit more about placing and location within Los Altos. Los Altos is big. I think it has what, about 12,000 homes or something.
11,000, yeah, a little over 11,000.
Yeah. So it's just about really planning it well and having some kind of like a standard, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, of kind of like a rule of thumb that shouldn't be like suppressed when considering where to place these or how to place these. I would say something like limiting the number of floors they can have or areas where they're located.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if that's too general, but
no, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Weinberg.
So it'd be nice to have what's it called, when these multifamilies access to a park where people can go either, walk their dog or stroll around with their kids or just play around with their kids and stuff. So it makes sense. It's not to go anywhere in cars. Cars should be parked underground and not take up the street. Keep the streets kind of like free from overcrowded parking. We don't want to be like Fremont or San Jose in some areas. It's just we want to really conserve our few sidewalks that we have and just keep that open area for families to walk around. I do it a lot too. So it just not overcrowding the streets. Yeah.
Councilmember Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mr. Mantica, thank you very much for applying.
Thank you, Jonathan. You're welcome.
So I just want to ask you, are you aware that if you're appointed to the DRC, you would have to recuse yourself from any project in which you really or your firm are involved in?
That is correct.
Okay, and it may even be more broad than that. If you have a close friend who's making a presentation, I don't know what the rules are, but there may be a gray area that you're going to have to explore, which may require you to recuse yourself.
Which is fine, but how does the commission know who my friends are?
Well, the commission doesn't, but you know who your friends are.
I know.
The point is to protect yourself and the city. I don't think anyone is going to say you need to recuse here or there. Ultimately, It's going to be up to you. And I'm not expecting any problems at all. I just want to make sure you're aware that there are strict complicated rules that may apply to you.
And that's good. And in a way, that's almost like a blessing for me. I hate to be the critic of my own projects. I hate it because I just, the more I look at them, the more I criticize them, the more I want to change things. So I would probably turn down a couple of my projects just because I would tell the commission like, this could probably improve. So it's probably a blessing for me. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember or Vice Mayor Meadows?
Yes, thank you. And I do have a question, but I just want to tag on to Councilmember Weinberg. So I did serve on design review and planning commission, and we've had realtors who've served on design review have to recuse if they sold various houses. We'd have to ask the city attorney to help us understand whether it's just the house or there's some boundary around it. So it is actually, I've seen it happen where people on the commissions have to recuse. So it's something we'll need to look into and have her help us
Sure.
understand. Speaking of having served on design review, this may sound counterintuitive, and you are an architect, but you're actually, although your expertise is of course highly relevant, you're not on design review to be an architect. You're on design review to be a facilitator between the homeowners who presumably are trying to build their dream home, between the neighbors who are change averse for the most part, and through our zoning codes. So how will you separate yourself from what might be a natural tendency to design from the dais, but it's not while you're there? How will you serve the facilitator role and present yourself from designing the project, which probably the homeowners don't want you to necessarily do?
I see it in a way, just listening to your question, I would probably see myself more as a tourist coming in and not trying to be the tour guide, but just kind of letting yourself go and going with the flow and see what's going on between the neighbors and them. If I have some objective solution that I could probably suggest to them just to improve, like a win-win situation for both, I would probably feel good to contribute that. And if not, just basically become this kind of like, it's not really so much a referee, but it's just more of it's just kind of like a whistle in the wind type of thing. You say something that probably sends a seed somewhere that's probably sprouts on a good idea, on some quarrel that there could be between a privacy of a neighbor or a simple solution. Or sometimes these people fight about very, very trivial things, and they're just looking for the hair in the soup. So they're trying to find something to nail these people down. So it's like, I mean, everybody has a right to remodel their house. Everybody has a right to just project their future, and they see their future growing up with their kids for the next 20 years. I mean, they have a right to remodel their house. That's why Los Altos has objective standards. They have if you're under those objective standards, and it should be good. And then there's a subjective part, which is much more delicate. I think the DRC is based very heavily on subjective parts, and that's where the opinions of people start clashing, just because I say tomato, you say tomato, and it becomes a thing of, it's just leveling down to the level of people and reminding that we're all people. We're all fighting our own battles. We're all humans, so it's just about just kind of like, relax, guys, relax. This has solutions and stuff. I mean, we're not gonna, it's just more about kind of like being the neutralizer, I guess. Because I wouldn't want to design their homes, but just kind of like saying, this is a community. Let's see how we can all live together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for us?
Yeah. What's the expectation of this role or this chair or this position, however it's called? But how many hours do you expect? Is it how much time do you get to review these projects? How much time do you get to sink your teeth into them and actually is it immediately right before a meeting you get a notice like a week before, and you say, okay, here are the plans, just prepare for next week's meeting, something like that? Or I know it's twice a month. Is that all the involvement that we need?
So I think that the vice mayor can add to what I'm going to say, and that is, you usually get plans a week to 10 days before the meeting. You have the option, depending on what's being presented, that you might want to arrange to go out and view the property in person and walk the property.
Okay.
the amount of work there is to be done by the Design Review Commission is changing. And that is one of the reasons why we preface this by saying there may be some changes here because state law is changing what we can review with commissions and how review and approval works vis-a-vis just having more things that staff will be able to approve without there necessarily being commission input. Some of that's still in flux. So I can't give you a hard and fast rule, but I think the vice mayor can tell you how much time she used to spend because she was on the Design Review Commission.
Gotcha.
Yes, I largely agree with what the mayor had to say. I would add that you do tend to have 2 meetings a month and they're rarely canceled. And there's often between 2, but more likely 3 to 4, occasionally even 5 projects on an agenda.
I got 2 canceled back to back about a month ago.
Yeah, and that does happen
Summer.
too. But it's really a hardworking commission, but it's always, I liked it because you get to be a nosy neighbor and see what everyone's building, so.
All right. Anything else, Mr. Mantica?
What else? What else? I knew I had questions. That pretty much answers it. I mean, it's you know, I mean, yeah, it's commissions are usually from 7 p.m. to about midnight sometime.
No, that commission usually, I'd say it's rare that it runs more than 2 hours.
Last time I was surprisingly quick. I guess I was just I jumped from a 2019 meeting to a 2021 meeting, and it was a big difference between them, but it was much shorter.
Yeah, partly that's the influence of the objective standards, I think.
Right.
So anyway, thank you for joining us tonight.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me, and I hope I didn't bore you too much.
And we're glad you're enjoying Los Altos.
All right. Thank you so
All
much.
right.
Have a great
Take
evening, guys.
care.
All right. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Good to see you all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, Madam Mayor, I still don't see our first applicant here.
Okay.
And that means we have about 20 minutes before our scheduled break.
Right. So we do have,
Commissioner Ahi is here.
I believe that all 4 of our listed other applicants for the Planning Commission are online. So this is my question to council. Would you like to take 2 and take a break or take 4 and take a break? So I'm going to look at you. You either have this way or this way, or none if you want to break now. 4, Councilmember Weinberg. 6, good. Yeah, that's all right. He loves to not let me just pose the question. You're very creative.
We're rewarding the applicants for being here early.
Yes. And Councilmember Liang.
No, I didn't want to break, so.
Okay,
Let's move
so
it
we're
on.
gonna rock and ride. We're gonna power through here, at least the next 4.
Perfect. All right. Well, then, on that note, our next applicant, incumbent Ahi. Yes.
Right.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome.
Hi, how's everyone?
Good. So you already know how this works. You get to take a minute or so to tell us why you want to be reappointed. Then we'll go around the group of council members who may or may choose not to ask you a question. You can ask us a question and then make a final statement and something we are telling everyone. And so I'm going to announce this here for all 4 of the next people, all in one fell swoop and not repeat it. And that is, we are likely to be making some changes and reevaluating how we're using and what the tasks are for our commissions, in part with respect to planning. That is driven by changes in state law, of which many of you are familiar. So we just are assuming that you're flexible and that you know that things could change.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead with that, and we'll let you start. Thank you so much for being here, Mayrus.
Yeah, thank you. Basically, I joined the Planning Commission 4 years ago, and I've grown to really love the position. I feel like I've been able to contribute a lot and make a big impact on certain things, whether it's project developments or housing elements or objective design standards. And so yeah, I feel like it's really been a great experience for me. I've learned a lot. I have in the 4 years that I've been on, I've only had one absence. So clearly I've been very dedicated to the position, and I really take the role very seriously. So hopefully I can have a second term, and that's about it.
All right. And so I'll start with Councilmember Flagger.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks, Marus. Nice to see you. Very, very happy you're reapplying. Why do you want to serve on the Planning Commission again? I'm kidding. So as an incumbent, and you've obviously done a lot of work and spent a lot of time on the commission, and I know even outside of meetings, really trying to get a lot of things right. Assuming you get appointed to another term, and you have the full council's attention here, can you share with us maybe one thing going forward that council could do more of, less of, to better support the Planning Commission?
Sure. I think that a lot of times with project development projects, I think that seeing things change once it's recommended by the Planning Commission and it goes to council, I think that can be a little bit frustrating from a planning commissioner perspective. But I think that, overall, I really would like to see certain things become more of a priority in the next 4 years if I'm appointed. I think that looking at, some low-hanging fruit, so to speak, I think that whether it's the CT zone and really evaluating which one of those, those parcels could be kind of possible better opportunities for housing, the Loyola Corners, that entire area. I think having a parking structure in downtown, there's a lot of things that have just been kind of very slow on the priority list. And I just hope that with my help on the Planning Commission, I feel like, we can get some of these big things done and be more proactive, I guess I could say.
Great. Thank you, Marus.
Thank you.
Thank you for reapplying. And we have someone who needs to mute. Would Ms. Couture, would you please mute your... Thank you. So if of all the things that the commission has done over the course of the last 4 years, what do you think was the most challenging, and why do you think you were ultimately successful in what the commission did?
I think my gut reaction would be to say the objective design standards, because I think that not only was it something we had to do, but I think it did show how successful it has been with some of the projects that we've seen in the past year. I think it is something that needs to be evaluated and looked at, continuously though. But I do think that exercise that we went through of Planning Commission and Council, really looking at, these objective design standards, I think was really successful. And I think it was productive. And I think that overall, you're going to see a lot better projects in the next 5 to 10 years. And so I think that that's something that I can pinpoint and look at and really be proud of, 10, 15 years from now.
Thank you. Councilmember Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Commissioner Aki, for reapplying.
Thank you.
What, if anything, do you think can be changed by the commission to make it more effective, or just in general operate better or better serve the city?
I do think that there are certain things that could be looked at by the Planning Commission and not have the ability to go to council. I think that, the commission could make the final decision on certain things. What those things are, I think needs to be evaluated. And I don't want to, say anything now that may need to be researched more, but I do think there are certain things that don't need to be seen by staff, commission, and council. And so I think that what I've tried to kind of do in the last 4 years is try to make things more efficient. So I do think there are things that we could be done that will make it even more efficient. So those are things that I would point to.
Vice Mayor?
Yes, thank you. So thank you for reapplying, Mr. Ahi. I learned so much from you when we overlapped on Planning Commission. So thank you for all that and for serving as a resource to our community. So I will ask you, which is unfair but I know you've seen the housing element draft, and so you're familiar. I was going to say we have a lot of programs in there to address the programs essentially as the tactics, how we're going to get to where we need to go. Can you describe a program, one or more if you want, that's your absolute favorite and you'd like to tackle first?
I think there's a few that I think would be great to look at. I mean, I think that the one that I've been, I guess, the most passionate about has been the parking situation in downtown. I think not only evaluating what we have now, but also planning for additional parking in the future, whether that's a garage or whether that's something else. I do think that is a gateway to a lot of CRS properties adding housing. And it also is going to be a resource for the buildings that are under construction right now. So I think that, again, being proactive about that now and not having it be a disaster in 10 years, I think is something that I would love to see in my second term if I'm allowed one. So yeah.
Councilmember Lee Ing.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioner Ahi, for your service on the Planning Commission your last 4 years. So you are definitely familiar with all our zoning codes. And so I just want to ask if you believe that the zoning codes today protect neighbors and their concerns adequately, and how can we improve on that, or what can we do to address any or mitigate neighboring concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as far as resident concerns, I've always really been sensitive to resident concerns. I've never tried to not listen to their concerns, whether it's about privacy or height. At the same time, I think that there is sometimes a lack of education with residents as far as what is allowed in our code and our zoning. I think that, in basically providing more information to residents about what we're allowed to do with these projects and what we cannot, do, I think would be really helpful and give them a better peace of mind. Because I think the frustration starts when they're not familiar with why these projects are coming up and why we can't ask developers to do certain things. And so I think that, just providing more information, I think would be really helpful for them. And, just continuously looking at our objective design standards and seeing that what works and what doesn't, and trying to modify them and refine them. I think we have to not be just satisfied with what we have, and we have to constantly be looking to the community to see what they like and what they don't like, because that's the best judge for how we're going to move forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So do you have any questions for us?
No, not really. I mean,
any
yeah.
final comments?
I think I'm good.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. Have a good evening.
Thanks so much.
And City Clerk, who's next? Mr. Bedonato, I think.
Yes, Mr. Bedonato is next, and he is here.
Great. Welcome, Mr. Bedonato.
Hello. I'm not sure why my camera isn't working, but let me try.
There it is. It is now.
Oh, is it working now?
It is.
Okay, great. Oh, it's
you appear to be frozen, however, so you may have a bandwidth issue.
Huh. Well, AT&T fiber is falling down on the job. Let me try try a different camera. How's that? There we go.
Yay. All right, so you know this drill. Give us a short summary of why you've applied, and then we'll do a little round of questions, and then you can ask us questions and make a final statement if you wish.
Sounds great. My name's Joe Beninato. I think I know all of you here on the council. I've lived in Los Altos for 22 years at 2 different residences. My background's in technology innovation, and that is both typical, software and hardware, but also some work involving modular housing and advanced building materials, specifically mass timber, or CLT as it's known. I am not a professional architect or developer, so I don't come from those worlds, but I did grow up in that world. My father was actually a restaurant owner as his primary business, and then what I would call a small-time real estate developer in the Chicago area. So I've seen some of that, and excuse me, I've worked through commercial and residential projects, both as a tech exec as well as building some homes, but haven't had to do that professionally. On the volunteer side, I volunteered for youth sports, both Los Altos Little League, which was a great experience, and also NJB basketball with both my children. And then past few years, I've been engaging more with nonprofits. So some of the Los Altos nonprofits, as well as some work nationally. But I haven't felt like I had the time available to fully commit to a position on a commission. And some circumstances have changed over the last year or so that gives me a little bit more time to be able to do that. It is daunting with people like Maris and Shelley and others who are professionals in those industries, but I felt like I could contribute to the Planning Commission, and hope that I'm selected to serve.
Thank you very much. And it's my turn to go first. So because I know you have been attentive to a number of the projects that have come through in the last couple of years, and based on what you know about our objective standards and what you know about living in the community, what do you think, if you could pick one thing in our objective standard, what would you change that you think would help our community?
Well, it's a real struggle between a group of residents who want to keep the city exactly as it's been for many decades, and those who might want to build larger structures. And specifically, as we look at the housing element and the huge increase, what is it, like 20% more residences that we need to build over the next 8 years, I think it's really daunting. The more we can clarify the objective design standards, I think it'll be really helpful, because like the things that I've seen that cause some confusion are around, the color palette and the materials. And in some cases it's unclear. I think at one point I used the example of the pink house, right? And if pink was not on the approved list of, blue, brown, and green, and whatever the other colors were, could you actually have a pink house in Los Altos? There are several of those, around town, as we've all seen. So I think just getting clear on, what are the types of houses that can be built in terms of materials, color palette, et cetera. And then, if there are things, I don't necessarily believe there's more clarification needed on setbacks and those sorts of issues, except as it comes to some of the changes with SB 9 and how 4 units on a single lot might relate to each other and or the neighbors surrounding them. So I suspect as we move forward under some of these new state laws, we're going to have to get some clarity around objective standards with regards to those specific SB 9 units that are being built.
Thank you. Mr. Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Beninado, for applying. What do you think the council can do to help improve the Planning Commission?
Well, I've attended, many meetings, probably somewhere between 15 and 25. I don't have an exact count, but I think, I've heard them on occasion say, well, council is just going to change all this anyway, so I'm not sure we should invest more time here. And that's got to be a little bit deflating for them to know they're putting in the time to do the homework, and they're making their recommendation, and then it could potentially be just thrown out the window completely. So I think I understand there's as Mayor had said earlier, that there might be some looking at the DRC and the Planning Commission and how those relate to each other. I think just being very clear on what the expectations are for what comes out of the Planning Commission and how that relates to the decision making that the council is going to make, or if that changes in the future, not make. I think that would be really helpful. But not having served, it's really hard to know what sorts of changes might be useful. I think it's better left to the experts like Maris and Shelley and some of the other commissioners who have been through that before with staff.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Meadows.
Good evening, Mr. Beninado. Thank
Good
you
evening.
for joining us tonight. You've been here since the beginning, so tonight, not of council.
Beginning of time? I'm not that old.
No, you're not. So in terms of your fit, I mean, so Planning Commission, of course, I'm probably biased, but Planning Commission, I think, has been a very effective commission. It has an interesting mix of expertise. And as you mentioned earlier, you're not an architect or a developer, neither was I. But so what's your special sauce you're going to bring to the commission, and how do you think you'll work with those already on it?
Well, it's been interesting because this started with a couple of conversations with some of the existing members of the Planning Commission who reached out. One happens to be my neighbor, and the other, I'd just gotten to know online, and just talking about some of the challenges that go on with this triumvirate of, well, I guess it's actually four parties with the builder or developer, staff, Planning Commission, and city council. And it reminds me a lot of the work I've done in the tech industry, where you have disparate groups, it might be sales, marketing, product, and engineering, and trying to come to some sort of consensus around how do we take the rules and the budgets and all of the constraints around a given situation and try and craft that into a cohesive plan. And so, most of my career was in the world of product management, which is frequently a central organizing spine of an organization that interfaces with lots of, other groups. And so, as I talked more about it and I looked at an opportunity to serve on a commission, it became clear that a lot of that work that I had done with cross-disciplinary, groups over the last 30 plus years was applicable to something like this. I think the difference is, and actually in the product world, this comes up a lot because you aren't necessarily, in control or responsible for a given decision. You're making a recommendation. You're recommending that the engineering team build a certain product, or that the sales team takes a specific go-to-market strategy, but you're not necessarily the leader or the manager of those teams. And so you're working to influence without having authority, and there are some parallels in that regard as well. Plus, I think there's some technical aspects to this that could be relevant as well. So that's how I would respond.
Thank you. Councilmember Liang.
I have no question. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Flyer.
Thank you, Mayor, and hi, Mr. Benenato.
Hello.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for applying and wanting to serve our community. I want to pick up on the Vice Mayor's question because, of course, it's always similar to mine. On what role you would play based on your background, and I know you shared your experience with product management, but whether it's the housing element, objective standards, or a particular development, and you've been to many planning commission meetings, can you share an example where you think your expertise and experience may have helped that situation? So either during the housing element update process, the objective standards, or even a development.
Well, take the objective standards. Most of the time in my career, I've been dealing with fairly complicated topics that either involve a innovation in a specific technology or in some other aspect of a product, and just getting very clear. And a lot of my responsibility would be in writing specs and spelling out specifically, here's what we understand, here's what we don't understand, here's a suggestion on how we might move forward to get more information or figure something out. And so, what I've noticed is a little confusion in some cases around certain aspects of our code. As an example, with the noise ordinance, when we looked at potentially putting in a generator, not to disparage the staff at all, but there was really little in the code around natural gas generators, and so someone had to make a judgment call on well, that's kind of like an air conditioner, I guess we'll throw it in there. And someone else thought it was more like a shed or an accessory structure. And so not having that clear spec led to ambiguity and confusion. And ultimately, with the noise ordinance, the inability to even put in a generator. So I think that's one example where having clarity around those objective design standards, because nobody wants to go through a process and follow all the rules, or at least think they're following the rules, and then discover at the end, well, you didn't really follow rules A, B, and C because you don't understand how they're written, or you didn't see them, or whatever it might be. So I think just getting clarity in that regard, especially with what I'm guessing is an understaffed and overworked planning team, that really presents some challenges in being a service-oriented, organization to the community in the case of the planning department. So that's one example that I think might be able to help with.
Great. Thank you. Do you have any questions for us?
Well, I know you mentioned that there might be some changes to the commissions moving forward. Is there any clarity on that at this point, or is it unclear?
It's pretty unclear. One of the drivers, and this won't surprise you because I know you're knowledgeable about this, is the recent spate of legislative changes as to how projects are approved and at what levels approvals can be made, and also the extent to which we have discretion on certain things versus you only can apply objective standards. And so that's all going to drive a bit of a rethink on what we're doing with, at least with planning and design, the Design Review Commission, and perhaps with other commissions.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, this stuff is moving so fast. And yep. I heard yesterday you guys recently were discussing a transit center location issue, and I heard yesterday the state a bill was passed around parking requirements being removed for locations near a transit center, which was somewhat shocking that happened. So you just approve something, and then a couple days later there's a new bill that basically throws a wrench into everything. So I think just keeping track of this stuff will be a challenge. The only other question I'd ask at this point is, in a situation like this, if I were to be invited to join the Planning Commission, are there specific programs or best practices that the city does in order to integrate the new commissioners who may not know what they're doing, the first 6 months to a year?
We hope it does. We hope the learning curve is a little shorter than that. Partly with people who have been to a number of commission meetings, they pretty much know what to expect and how business is done. It's actually a little bit trickier with people who've only been to 1 or 2 commission meetings. But we do have a training program. We're always looking at that and how to improve that, as well as training for the people who run our meetings, because that tends to rotate year to year. And even, as I'm sure Vice Mayor will attest, and all of our city council members have been on commissions, as you know, that, they tend to evolve and change over time with what they're doing. And we try to just keep things on track and make sure people feel comfortable with what they're doing.
Great. Well, if selected, I would be honored to serve, and I really appreciate the time tonight.
Thank you very much for joining us. Have a good evening.
Thank you. You too.
All right, moving right along, our next applicant, Theresa May Couture. And I see her coming online. You're still on mute, Ms. Couture. I might be able to help. Oh,
sorry, I got it. I apologize.
You're okay.
I've been on Zoom meetings so much today. There was a screen that I was like, wait, what is that? Thank you very much for having me today, Honorable Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. For 3 decades, I've been a practicing real estate broker in Los Altos. I've lived here most of my life. During that time, many of my clients have sought my guidance and help with both the planning department and the building department to try to get a house built or remodel a room or etc. I've attended many meetings, both city council, planning, other meetings, finance, etc. I've followed the planning commission with all their careful, thoughtful amendments and developing plans to implement the goals and objectives to try to allow Los Altos to have a long-term viability, both taking care of the people who've lived here for a long time and trying to make room for people who want to live here because this is such a great town. My experience is working with staff and my ability to communicate, and my dedication to working, I think can contribute to the continued success of the Planning Commission, and that's why I would like to join the Planning Commission.
Thank you very much. Mr. Weinberg, you get to kick off the first question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Couture, thank you very much for applying. What, if anything, do you think the City Council can do to help improve the Planning Commission?
Actually, I think it's more the Planning Commission that can help the City Council. It's a daunting task to look at both the housing element, the downtown vision plan, and the objective designs. And in order to help the City Council understand the plans that come before them, really strong identification of what's good and what's not following the guidelines, I think is important. There's a lot of Brown Act rules that have to be followed, but if we could help anybody who's not quite understanding some plan, I think would help a lot. And also helping the staff when we write our reports so they don't have to rewrite the whole report, I think would be great.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Meadows.
Thank you. Good evening, Ms. Couture. So you're about 1 year into your 4-year term on the Public Arts Commission. So why do you want to change commissions?
Public arts needed some structure. We needed some guidance. We needed a plan, and we together implemented that. We feel like we're on a good roll. And if I leave arts, we still have a quorum without me. And I have a couple people that would like to apply for art, but I don't know, they somehow didn't get to the deadline. So that's why.
Councilmember Lee Eng.
That was my, Vice Mayor Meadows asked my question. So, but then I guess I could ask another one. Can you suggest, neighbors always have concerns regarding some of the privacy with new developments. And how can we assure that we address or mitigate privacy concerns or neighboring concerns about the new developments coming up? Do you feel that, I'll keep it as simple as that. Go ahead.
So I think the biggest thing that neighbors that have been here for a while are worried about is their privacy and the noise. Privacy we can fix easily with bigger landscaping, and making sure that the developer is following all the daylight plane guidelines, and also making sure that windows that look over aren't clear, they're glazed, etc. Those are pretty easy fixes, but landscaping that's going to stay good and is not going to die, I think is one of the best things that we can do. And it's not expensive, and it's also helps our environment and our climate.
Thank you.
Councilmember Flagger.
Thanks, Mayor, and hi, Ms. Couture. Nice to see you again. Thanks for applying for a different commission, and as always, we appreciate our residents wanting to serve our community. We all are familiar with your deep experience in real estate, but I'm curious, how familiar are you with the state laws, the state housing laws, and what do you think of them?
So there's a lot of new state housing laws, SB 9, and I'm not sure of all of them, but a resourceful person always looks at all the rules that they're supposed to look at before they make a decision on anything. And fortunately, the internet gives you all those. And I've seen many times where the planning department does a super good job with new things that are coming up. And the legislatures are very good about putting all that online. And it's not very hard to find all those things. I mean, every time something changes with the planning department, I'm aware of it to help my clients. So I try to keep up on that. I have a lot of other things that I do, but if I intend to be on this board, I would definitely make sure that I'm up on all the latest rules. I've got the objective standards printed out. I've got the housing element printed out, because I do go on a lot of the meetings and I have to look at things just to see, okay, does that ring true?
Thanks, Ms. Couture. And the follow-up to that is, so you mentioned SB 9. What are your thoughts on SB 9?
SB 9 gives more, what I would call easier to accept for Los Altons. 4 little structures on a property is a lot easier for somebody to accept than a 4-story building on the adjacent property. So as long as you go by the guidelines and the neighbors are all aware of how it's going to look with the modeling drawing, I think it's a lot easier for them to be able to accept it. There's been so many ADUs that have gone in the last 2 years in Los Altos. It's amazing. Over 50, I think.
Thank you, Ms. Couture.
Okay, and I have a question about development. One of the things that seems to come up is that neighbors say, oh, gee, I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know that, my neighbor was going to tear down the house until the fence went up. I didn't know this and that. Based on your long tenure in Los Altos and as a realtor and staying in touch, I know, with your clients, what do you think we could do better to inform neighbors about what's going to happen when someone's going to make a significant change on a property?
My idea is a little bit off the wall, but having a planning commissioner able to do like a town meeting So to say, you know, come talk to me about, you know, what's going on. We can look at, you know, if you go online, you can see all the remodeling permits that have gone out. You can let them know what's coming up. And if people know where to go to look for things, they're there. The problem is that people are super busy. They've got kids, they've got PTA, they've got work, and they don't have time to always go and look at all that. So if they knew, you know, somehow if we could meet with the public to say, look, this is the kinds of things that are happening this month, they would know before, you know, I mean, like I'll see a post going up for a PG&E and I know something's going on, and I'll tell the neighbors around, hey, you might want to go look and see what's happening. So to be more proactive instead of reactive by the Planning Commission, I think would be awesome.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any questions for us?
My biggest question is, how can the Planning Commission help the City Council get the work done that they need to have done? That's my biggest question. How can we make it easier for you?
I think we'd all love to have an answer for that. It's one of the things
Maybe
that
we
I
can
think
brainstorm
we will
on a Brown Act meeting.
I think we will be when we start talking about possibly restructuring what we're doing with the commissions, the planning and the design review commission. I mean, a number, and you've been listening to all of the comments, a number of the applicants have brought up issues analogous to that. You know, how do we make this all work better? And I think we're all interested in making it work better, but I think it'll take some conversation among us to figure that out. So I'm going to punt on that one for now.
Well, I appreciate that. Communication is always really important for people, and especially in Los Altos, because there's so many different great people who live here, who many of them have come here from somewhere else, and they don't really know all the good things that we have here. So if we can point all that out, that would be great. And I'd be happy to help.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us this evening.
All right, our next applicant is Ms. Kate Disney. Let's see where she went.
I saw her earlier.
Yes, so did I. She's not on anymore.
Where did we lose her? Don't see her on the attendees.
She might have had broadband issues.
Yeah, maybe you can give her a quick call, City Clerk.
Yes.
Thank you. Meanwhile, I will take a look. It's way early, so I do not expect that we would see any of our historical commission applicants yet. But you guys all have eyes. Does anybody see any of them?
Yes, Mr. Bear is here.
Aha, yes, I see Mr. Bear. Thank you.
So I've tried reaching out to Miss Disney and went straight to voicemail, and her voicemail is full.
Okay. Well, let's hope she finds her way back online. And so I'll go back to my colleagues, are you okay? Normally, we try to finish one group of commissions before we move to another. Would you like to wait at all? Would you like a break now? Would you like to begin with Mr. Bear?
Mayor,
Yes.
I'm wondering if we shouldn't take a break. I mean, I'd really rather power all through, but I don't see other of the historical commission people here. And nor did the Parks and Rec person show up either. I don't know what exactly is going on, but if we go with Mr. Bear, then, I mean, I guess we could go with him and then take a break afterwards if no one shows up for a while, but.
I think we'd be well served. Mr. Weinberg, go ahead.
Maybe as another alternative, we can table agenda item 1, tackle number 2, and that'll put us back on track for where we're supposed to be with the interviews.
Councilmember Fliger, are you shaking your head?
No, I'm fine with that approach as long as we still get a break in there somewhere.
Right. I'm going to suggest we take a break. I think the plan was a 15-minute break originally. So let's take a 15-minute break to 7:27. Thank you all. We will be back and we appreciate everyone who's waiting. We'll be back. Okay, we are back in session at 7:27, and City Manager received a message that Ms. Disney had logged off and would be logging back on at the time that is on her appointed time to be interviewed. So since we have the benefit, I think, of having 2 of our other applicants for the Historical Commission available to us, let's go ahead and I don't believe that Ms. Coe is here, but I believe Mr. Adams has joined us.
Yes,
So we wanted to let you know, Mr. Adams, that we're running rather considerably ahead of schedule. So it is fortuitous that you have joined us. If you don't mind, we'll take things a little bit out of order and interview you next. Welcome. And this is the way we do this, is we ask you to take a minute or so to summarize why you are applying for whatever commission. And then we do a round robin among the city council members who can each ask you a question. And then we give you a chance to ask us any questions that you have and make a final statement. This usually takes about 10 or 12 minutes. So if you don't mind going ahead and getting us started.
Okay, my name is Jonathan Adams. I've been a resident of Los Altos for 38 years. I live in a home that is on the historic registry. We were an applicant to join the registry because we enjoy this unusual home. It's a post-adobe construction and wanted to preserve it for longer than we would be here. I have my wife has been on the board of the History House for 6 years, and I have a longstanding interest in history and the things that make Los Altos unique.
Great, thank you very much. My rotation, I think, shows that Vice Mayor Meadows, you're up first.
Good evening, Mr. Adams. You and I are almost neighbors, so I know your home, and not only from the outside, but it's a very interesting home. Is your screensaver from your?
It's from the backyard.
Yeah. Okay. Very nice. So I appreciate you applying. Have you watched any of the commission meetings, and if so, how do you think you'll be able to fit in with the other commissioners? What will you bring to bear to the discussions?
I have not had the advantage of watching the commission meetings, but I have known members on people who have been on the commission and have enjoyed talking to them about affairs that the commission is involved in.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lee Eng. You're on
Oh.
mute.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Adams, for your interest in serving on this commission. Can you share with us what is useful that the commission can do in this upcoming year, the historical?
Well, I think the commission has a very good set of goals in terms of both preserving the index and the various the essay participation, getting the children of Los Altos involved and looking at the history, and also the designation of an award for something that has been done significantly in terms of furthering the history in Los Altos, the award that the commission is involved in every year.
Thank you.
Councilmember Flyger.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Adams. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for applying and wanting to serve our community, and congratulations on your home being on the HRI, on the index. I'm curious because you obviously went through the process, and I'm not sure what year that was, but any feedback on the process, anything you would change?
No, I thought it seemed very reasonable. It was there were people who were not interested in having their home on the index, and I understand that people are motivated by a lot of different things when it comes to these kinds of things. Concern about perhaps having some restriction on the way their property is used. We have a house that was built in 1943. We believe we actually haven't been able to determine who the architect or the builder was. It's always been a source of mystery. But we believe that the house was built during the war and not completed until shortly thereafter. But it was a unique property, 2 acres on Almond Avenue. And actually, we've been able to give the History Museum some film that was shot in late 40s of pickers, apricot pickers, who came and picked the 2 acres of apricots. It's nice to be able to continue these things. His history is one of the things that makes a community, and I very much believe that it's all of us can engage at that level. It doesn't need to be political. It's something that everybody can be interested in.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask you a difficult question. You mentioned the people who were not interested in having their homes on the inventory, and recent state law means that in some cases, when someone builds a home or buys a property and wants to, let's say, tear it down, build a new home, the city has new sets of rules that it needs to follow and is somewhat constrained in the time available to determine whether that was a historic home, and potentially prevent or some ways inhibit what can be done with it. What's the solution to that situation?
Well,
what do we do with those existing homes that maybe would qualify for the inventory, but that aren't on it?
Unfortunately, the reality is the homeowner has their funds are invested in the home, and they have the ability to maintain or not maintain a home in the way that will be able to be preserved in the future. So unfortunately, the dynamic is not on the side of those who want to prevent people from doing something with their property. I just don't see that that's particularly, it's difficult to force people to preserve something they don't want to preserve, is what I'm saying.
Yes. Mr. Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor, and Mr. Adams, thank you very much for joining us tonight and for applying for a seat on the commission. My question is similar to the mayor's, but I think a little bit different, sort of more philosophical. Ideally, what deference do you think should be given to a homeowner when determining whether or not a property should be considered historical?
I think that there are some homes that are clearly more historical than others. This is a sliding scale, clearly. And there are probably some homes that are absolutely very historical and would be a great loss to the community if they were not there. That said, I think that most homes that are on the index are sort of somewhere between there and not quite there. I think that on the whole would probably give deference to the homeowner, though. It's just the nature of the beast. That these are citizens, and participating in this aspect of life is for people to decide to do. You can't make people interested in history if they're not.
Thank you. Do you have any questions for us, Mr. Adams?
What are your expectations for the commission in terms of being active in terms of seeking out additional ways to participate in the community?
Well, I think you enumerated ones that are already in the normal work plan of the commission, but the council, I think, is open to, and that's part of what we look to the commission, new ideas that might be helpful in expanding people's awareness of our history within, of course, staff constraints and the time constraints that resource constraints that we have. So that's, part of the commission is to be able to bring things forward to council and say, gee, we really think you ought to do thus and so.
Yeah, I think what's going on with the American Legion Hall is somewhat interesting. Should there be more of a restoration of what it might have looked like in the past, as opposed to making it a useful structure for today?
Right. Well, we thank you for joining us tonight. We thank you for your interest in history, your commitment to preserving the house that you have. And I'd love to see that film, because in 1960s, I was one of those kids picking cotton in this valley.
Yeah, it was really quite amusing in that Almond Avenue, you could see the cars lined up for the pickers on Almond Avenue. It was before any of the subdivision had taken place, and the high school wasn't there.
Right, right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. You have a good evening.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I was able to connect with Lisa Coe. She said she's on her way back, so she will be joining us here shortly. And Jonathan Bear is with us here now.
All right. Well, I suggest we take Mr. Bear, and then if Ms. Disney logs in as she said she was going to, we might have to stall her out for 5 minutes, and then we take her and then Ms. Coe. So, Mr. Bear.
Mayor, good evening.
Good evening. You know the drill. What would you like to say to us?
Well, most of you know me in one role or another with regard to the city. You may not be familiar with the fact that I have been actively involved with historic preservation. My wife and I bought the 1906 home, which was City Landmark #1, and restored it, and have been involved in a number of other historic preservation efforts in the community and in the valley over the last 25 years, including Griffin House, Halsey House, and helping to encourage a number of my neighbors to preserve their homes, including a wonderful Monterey Colonial on Pepper.
And so Councilmember Lee Eng, I think you would be up first. You have a question for Mr. Bear.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Bear, for your interest in serving on the Historic Commission. What is useful that the commission can do in the coming year? And what can we do to better seek grants for historic properties in Los Altos?
All right, so what this commission can do better is meet on a regular basis and to really fill in the holes in the HRI. And that involves better identification of historic properties. That by itself is important. It's also a requirement of SB 9. It's also a requirement of the city, as you are aware. Better notification of homeowners, realtors, and buyers of what the benefits are and restrictions are on historic homes. More and better carrots to create incentives for historic preservation. We have a very limited array of incentives today. There's landmark status, and with that comes potential for Mills Act, but there's certainly other things we can do. And that's what generally applies to individual homeowners. With regard to grants, grants are really in the purview of city property. And certainly there are several city historic properties that would be eligible for county and federal grants. And that just requires enough early notification, enough coordination with the people who know how to write grants proposals, and enough productive interaction, particularly with the county historical commission, which really has a wealth of knowledge and contacts and political muscle in terms of being able to access those grants.
Thank you. Councilmember Flagger.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Bear. Nice to see you. And thanks for applying and wanting to serve after several years of taking a break. As you know, the commissions have staff liaisons and they work closely with staff to move agenda items forward. I'm curious how you would handle a situation where the historical commission wants to go in one direction and staff, and I use staff in general terms, could be the attorney, it could be the director, is advising that the commission goes in a different direction. How would you handle that as a commissioner?
Okay, so, ultimately what happens in the commissions, as you are well aware, is at the direction and discretion of the city council. And I think there's an annual meeting of commissions. I think that meeting and a more than perfunctory discussion about what the real role of the historical commission is, what the council is willing to do or not with regard to historic preservation is frankly long overdue. And then if there's an issue with staffing, that's a negotiation between the council and the city manager. And that's the level it has to happen. And I would contend that that discussion is probably long overdue. But I also recognize right now we have very limited staff and we have too many projects going on. So I think setting realistic expectations, setting the appropriate staffing levels, understanding the things that can be done without necessarily it being staff driven. I think there are opportunities to have things be commission or community driven work, which I haven't seen enough of. And because right now, depending upon staff to do all the work is probably very unrealistic.
And Mr. Bear, I may give you a pass on that. You actually didn't answer my question. You focused more on if the commission wants to do something and there's not enough staff support to carry it out versus if there's a disagreement in direction, but based on the time, that's also a valid answer. So I'll just have the mayor move on to the next question.
Okay.
Thank you. And I will ask the question, if you had to choose one thing, given the constraints of staff and knowing how many projects there are, if there was one thing that you would hope the commission could accomplish with the concurrence of the city council and with whatever staff resources were so that everyone was on board, what would be that one thing?
Updating the HRI.
Okay.
It's woefully out of date. The last update to it was at least 10 years ago. Numerous properties were missed. And with SB 9, we've got a 50-year rule. And so we have to take a much closer look at properties and really update that. And then with that comes all the things that cascade from that, which is how do you properly notify people? How do you properly notify realtors? What's the process you put in place? Because what you're trying to do is avoid surprises. You're trying to avoid surprises to residents, to homeowners, to buyers. And that's really critical. I mean, because otherwise stuff, you know, we wind up with unhappy people, we wind up with lawsuits. Those are not good things. And I know this council is very interested in avoiding paying Jolie and her cohorts way too much money to defend us in court.
Councilmember Weinberg?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, Mr. Bear, and thank you very much for applying for the commission. Philosophically, what deference do you think should be given a property owner when determining whether or not to categorize a property as historic?
Okay, so do you want the truthful answer or do you want the politically correct answer?
I want the truthful answer.
The politically correct answer is, of course, you let the homeowner decide.
I want the truthful answer.
Okay, the reality is there are lots of cases where something is historic or it's not, right? And if it's historic, it's historic. Now, what you do about the property, how do you handle it, is a secondary level question, and it's a fair question to be asked and answered. There is, as the prior applicant, who I strongly encourage you to appoint to the Historical Commission, you know, he clearly points out there are properties that are gray. And they're gray for reasons that have more to do with the textbook definition of historic properties. So, you know, if somebody has replaced the siding on a house, you know, by some textbook definitions, the house is no longer historic. You know, we need guidance on those things. You know, the reality is, more often than not, houses have been altered over time. I mean, when we bought our house, the roof had been cut off because there had been a fire in the attic in the 1920s. You know, the front porch had been enclosed. The front door, the locks had, the original lock mechanism had been taken out. There had been a badly done addition on the back of the house. Yet it had been deemed to be a city landmark, and it was actually the beginning of historic preservation in Los Altos. And so instead of getting into the, you know, is it historic or not, I would rather sit down and understand what makes things clearly historic, what makes things clearly not, and then without getting into the heat of the moment, talking about individual properties, address the question, well, if somebody has changed out a couple of windows, what does that do? If somebody has replaced the siding, but the basic envelope of the house is still there, how do we handle that? And I think that's a better way to have a discussion about historic properties. Ultimately, that has to involve council. That has to involve staff. That has to involve the historical commission. Because it isn't clear cut on a lot of properties. And instead of getting into the heat of the moment, you really need to set up reasonable guidelines, which is how we've done zoning, how we do all the things we do in town. We set up guidelines. We say, these are reasonable guidelines. And then we don't get into, well, you know, that zoning doesn't apply to me. We do allow people to ask for variances. And so maybe we need a slightly different process than what we have today. Hope that helps.
Vice Mayor.
Good evening, Mr. Bear.
Good evening.
Another neighbor, other side from Mr. Adams, but good to see you. So you've served obviously for a long time on a different commission, and you know, watch council. You're very well versed in what goes on. So as a public commenter, you're certainly not shy about expressing your opinions, and I respect that and I appreciate that. Sometimes you're not very gentle in expressing your opinions, whether this be to council, commissions, whatever. And sometimes I'll just use an example from council recently. You asked council, and I might be paraphrasing and I might have listened to it wrong, so you can correct me. But I thought I heard you say about a project that council should ignore state law because they're, you know, messing up our town. And, you know, that's not obviously a quote, but that we should do what's right for Los Altos. So as a public commenter, one can make statements. Now you're interviewing for a commission position. So as a commissioner, which I know you've served well and long before, how will it be Mr. Bear, the public commenter serving on the commission, or will it be Mr. Bear, the representative of Los Altos, who will try to be gentler sometimes if people need a little tender handling in the case, or you know, how will you regard state laws as they affect what the commission will hear?
I have never encouraged the council to ignore state law. What I encourage the council to do in the case of a number of projects is to look at our rules and regulations and think about how we can, within the boundaries of state laws, address and mitigate some of the negative consequences of and unintended consequences of those laws. And that has to do with, in that particular case, plate height and roof decks. And I understand that in the heat of the moment, you cannot arbitrarily change those rules, but you know, there is an opportunity to change them on a citywide basis. But I digress. So I spent 9 years on the Planning Commission. I do understand that one's role on the dais, or I guess these days it's the virtual dais, is very different. And I am well familiar with that. So to answer your question, when you get me on the dais, you get John Bear, who abides by the rules and regulations and applies appropriate deference to council and applicants. When I'm speaking as a member of the public without any affiliation, as I have for the last 8 years, I feel the ability to be a little more candid. But you know, being on commission has different rules and responsibilities, and I recognize that.
And thank you. I just want to say, I'm not asking for deference to council. I think we're tough, so we'll take the frank talk. But with applicants, everyone in this town is our neighbor, whether they're close or a little farther away. And I think we should be gentle and respectful of our neighbors and make sure they're comfortable with the process that we have them go through.
I'll stand on my record on the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Bear.
And Mr. Bear, do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, my fundamental question is, where does the council stand on being interested in actually making sure that the rules, the things we put in place for historic preservation actually work, and actually accomplish the goal of creating the proper carrots and sticks to preserve our history in this town. And Mayor, if you don't mind, I would rather hear from somebody other than you, because I think I understand where you stand on historic preservation.
I'll invite any one of my colleagues who wants to say anything and wind this up.
I can speak as a former design review commissioner and planning commissioner and resident of the town. So in my experience, when people bring forward projects and they want to restore them, like that beautiful house and water tank on Yerba Buena, I believe it is, these are projects of passion and we should support them. And I think our commissions have done that very well historically. The issue is when we get into the situations like Mr. Adams mentioned, where someone has a different idea for their property. And so I don't know what the answer is yet, but we should be doing all we can. You talked about carrots to encourage people who have the passion. It's a labor of love. I mean, you know that you're a historic homeowner. And we should be trying to foster that rather than, forbidding people to do with their properties what they want to. But you're right, we need to be clear when people are buying these properties, what they might be, what might come with that historic designation if it has one already. So I'll stop right there. That's probably more TMI.
Thank you very much, Vice Mayor. And thank you, Mr. Bear, for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
And we're going to do a little hopscotch here and hopscotch back to a planning commission applicant. I think we have Ms. Disney. Is that right, City Clerk?
Yes, I see her here. Miss Disney, can you?
She sent me a note. She sent me a note in chat indicating she was here. So
I see her in the panelists and I thought chat was disabled.
Yep. So she just needs to unmute.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank
so
you.
The general drill is you get a minute or so to say why you want to, why you applied for this commission, and then we'll do a round robin among the council to ask you questions. Then you get a chance to ask questions and make a final statement.
Okay. So I moved to Los Altos in 1996. And it was really a dream come true to be able to move into this city. I immediately got involved. I served on the precise plan for the Sherwood Triangle. Unfortunately, the Sherwood Triangle looks a lot like it did when I moved here. But it was a really good experience and I met people in the city. And then from there, I applied to the Planning Commission and was appointed in 2000 and served for 8 years. So I did 2 terms on the Planning Commission. Why I want to do it. I mean, I've already done it for 8 years and I really enjoyed doing it. I really learned a lot about land use planning. I liked digging in and getting the facts. I loved meeting the neighbors. I would always go to the site and do a walkthrough and spend a lot of time there. And I liked meeting with the neighbors. When people emailed me, I was responsive and I spoke to the people who had a stake in the project, whether they were the applicant or the neighbors. So I really liked that level of involvement. I learned a lot, which is one of the reasons why I'd like to be on the Planning Commission again. And I feel like we're in a kind of a different climate now with the RENA numbers and the state laws. There's just a tremendous amount of pressure that the city is under to build more housing. You know, as you said, Anita, I think 1,800 units, which is a tremendous number of new units. So how do we do that and not completely unravel this town? How do we preserve it so, you know, people recognize it as the town they loved when they moved here? So that's going to be a real challenge. You know, how do we objectify our design standards so that we're fair and equitable with all our applicants that are going to be coming before us? So I think the challenge would be, yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I think it'd be a really interesting challenge to be in this role and try to figure out how do we balance the needs of the residents, minimize the harm that we do to the city, while at the same time meeting the laws and the requirements that are put upon us by the state.
Councilmember Fliger, I think you're up first. Thank you, Ms. Disney.
Thank you, Ms. Disney. Nice to see you. And thanks for applying and wanting to serve on the Planning Commission again. I'm going to pick up on the statement you just made about balancing, preserving a lot of what we have now in Los Altos with the different state housing laws coming down. And I know in your application, you mentioned also developing standards to reflect the values of our residents. And so if you could please talk to how you reconcile those two and how you would handle a situation where the law requires one thing, but the value that you're trying to preserve conflicts with that law.
And that is really the hardest part of the job of the planning commissioner, is doing that balance. And where is that balance? Like, where is the fulcrum, right? In that, you know, balance that's really difficult. I think the key is you have to have very clear development standards, right? The zoning codes are very objective, and you have to enforce them, and you have to do that consistently. But the design guidelines often are kind of a gray area. So how do you balance all of that? And I think it is difficult. What I found on the Planning Commission is sometimes we end up stressing about issues that really end up not being a very big deal. And then there are other things that we completely miss that have far more of an impact on the neighbors than the thing we stressed about. So we have to do our homework, right? You have to talk to the neighbors, you know, in the community. You have to do your homework. You have to dig in and spend some time with that project, and really find out what are the issues here, and what are those things that are going to be the most difficult to mitigate from the point of view of the people around the project. So so with balancing, we want to look at what are the things that we need to provide opportunities for, such as we want to be able to make sure that we don't have impacts that are difficult to mitigate, like noise, like unreasonable light. We want to make sure there's room for shrubbing a project up. We want canopy over our street. We want bike lanes. We want, you know, we want a project that is going to be kind of that next generation, right? We don't want something that is so jarring and out of scale with what is around it. So I think we have to kind of look at all those things and understand that, okay, you know, design is something we do under constraint, right? There's always constraints. Nobody designs without any constraints. Everyone has a budget. Everyone has zoning codes that they have to live with. So the question here is, what are the reasonable constraints that we're going to have that ensures that we do meet the state laws, that we do get more housing, but we don't do harm to the neighbors. That we're able to mitigate the impacts in a reasonable way, so that the town can grow without there being a lot of people being upset about how it's growing.
Thank you.
Since you were involved with the Sherwood precise plan, and as you observed, nothing's happened, I'm going to throw you a curve here and say, have you got any idea of what we could do there?
Can we get the redevelopment agency back? Right? I mean, if you really want to know what the problem is, we don't have redevelopment agencies anymore. So that's the problem. So what can we do? We need to, as a city, put a lot more pressure on the state. We have to be, I don't think this is the role of the planning commissioner, but I'd like to see the powers that be flex their muscle and try to put more pressure on the state and try to influence things at higher levels, because right now we are being acted upon, right, by the state, and that makes life difficult. So you have to be proactive as possible while following the state law. So what's wrong with Sherwood Triangle? I would say we have, I think, very few property owners in that area, right? I think, so how do we give an incentive for development there? I'm not really sure. I think that the restaurant there and the people who own property there, I think some of them are happy with the way things are. There's been some new development. But there isn't going to be new development in the Sherwood Triangle until I think the city looks at the frontage along San Antonio Road. There's no sidewalk. You have to navigate cars going in and out of the surface parking in front of the storefronts. And if the city invested or had the funds to invest in creating the streetscape along San Antonio Road, it might be a big incentive for property owners there to actually make some improvements. So I think it's kind of a, I think both the city and maybe the people that own property there, they're both kind of responsible for it being kind of in this somewhat static state.
Thank you. Councilmember Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor. And Ms. Disney, thank you very much for joining us tonight and for applying for a seat on the commission. I've been paying very close attention to your answers tonight, and I read your application probably 10 times before the meeting today, more than any other. Your passion is clear. Your dedication and the level to which you care about the city really comes through. It's come through in your answers tonight. It came through in your application. I know that you've spoken to the council several times over the past 6-7 months. And I do appreciate the input that you give. I want to ask you 2 questions, one of which I think is a follow-up on a question that Councilmember Flagler asked. And that is, in the event that you are considering a project which in your mind clearly conflicts with the city's values, but those values conflict with state law, how will you resolve that dilemma? And my second question to you has to do with a phrase that you've used several times tonight, and I think also in your application, which is to not do or prevent harm to the community. So my second question to you is, how do you determine what is harmful to the community?
Okay, so, all right, let me go to the first question, which is, how do you balance, development with.
No, it wasn't a question of balance. It's what happens when what you believe is a core value of the city conflicts with state law. How do you resolve the dilemma? Not how do you balance?
Well, okay, all right. So, okay, so what I believe is a core value of the city is what I think the citizens tell me their core values are. So it's not me saying Kate Disney thinks this is a good design or this is Kate's core value. I really believe that our role on the commission is to serve the citizens, okay? Do what they want. That's our job. So my core values should be aligned with what the citizens want, okay? And you don't know what the citizens want until you talk to a lot of citizens, particularly those who are most impacted by a project. Okay, so what if then I think my core values are aligned with the citizens? What do I do when those values don't align with state law, right? That's your question, right? I believe that's the question, right?
Hypothetically, a development meets state requirements, and under the law, the city does not have the discretion to deny a project. But you know in your heart and after talking with citizens that this project does not meet our core values. How do you resolve that dilemma?
Okay, well then I think it becomes an issue of like, okay, this project, you know, we can't deny the project, but can we mitigate, right? And I mean, meaningfully mitigate. So okay, so rather than talking in the abstract, let's give us a specific example. Let's say it's a big building on El Camino and there are people who live in single family right next to it. Okay, what do you do with that? They expected that project to never be over 3 stories and now it's a lot higher than three stories. What are you gonna do? Okay, well, then you say, okay, how do we mitigate, right? So maybe we can't deny the project, but do we need lights on the back of the building? Do we need sight lines into the person's yard? Can we articulate the building and create some negative space so it's not like having a concrete wall next to your house? Can we make sure there is no noise? You know, or can we minimize the noise? Can we cite the noise making machinery in the front of the building so that it's not impacting the people behind it? Can we create enough of a setback and still meet you know, state law such that there's an opportunity for category 1 trees, right? So how do we make the best of it? You know, how do we shrub it up and soften it and make it as good as it can possibly be, given that we can't really deny the project? So I think that's where you're at. I mean, you have to come up with conditions and you have to be consistent and treat all, you know, applicants the same. But what we need are these objective design standards that mitigate noise, light, and provide an opportunity for shrubbing and you know, street trees. And I think that's the way that we really can make it so that, you know, people aren't finding these projects so jarring. And, you know, kind of on another note with this is, can we look at a project and say, what are some opportunities? What are some things that the neighbors might gain? Because we tend to look at the project and go, it's all bad, right? It's all bad. You know, this change is bad. How do we make the best of it? But sometimes there's opportunities in projects that we overlook. And I mean, back to the example with El Camino. If you live near El Camino, you get a lot of noise from El Camino. If you put a building in front of a house, a single family house, and you do it the right way, you can actually create a backyard for someone that is now more quiet than it's ever been before. So can we figure out how to build these projects so they actually they offer some benefits to the neighbors, not just benefits to us, you know, checking off some RENA numbers and say, you know, okay, we you know, we got some more housing, great. But I mean, how do we make it so that, you know, maybe there's benefits to the people around the project if we're careful and we kind of dig in And we really think through, how do we do this the right way? Because a lot of cities are going to have to do this. And there's going to be people who do it well. And there's going to be cities that just sort of think planning is easy and, you know, you can do it fast and quick. And, you know, it's not fast and quick. Design under constraint is really, really hard. It took our family 10 years to build a house. I mean, sad to say.
I'm gonna ask you to wind that up and ask Vice Mayor Meadows if she would ask her question, please.
Thank you. Good to meet you, Ms. Disney, even if just virtually. I don't, for some reason, we haven't run into each other before. So, so I'm going to ask you, so you served for 8 years on Planning Commission, and you've probably been, and you know, but that was about 14 years ago, plus or minus. So a lot has changed. Again, the state laws that we've been talking about, it feels like most of the evening. But so when you were a planning commissioner and you saw some developments go through and things happened kind of slowly around this town, can you give me an example? And it doesn't have to be from when you were a planning commissioner, but a development that you didn't like when you were a planning commissioner or since then that has been completed, because you've been around long enough to have seen projects completed, unlike some of us actually. So a project that was completed that you didn't like when it was a project, and lo and behold, it turned out better than you expected. So is there any example of that you can, and why did you find it turned out better in the end than you had expected? And what lessons did you learn from that, if any?
Oh, that's a hard question. Okay, so what projects turned out better than expected? That's the question?
Or that's a question, but if it's a hard one. So you had an idea of it when you saw it as a planning commissioner or as a resident after you were a planning commissioner and were watching a project come through and you were like, oh, they did this wrong or that wrong, or I don't like it. And it turned out better than expected. Why did it turn out better than expected? And what did you learn from having thought it was not so good in the first place, and yet it's not so bad after all? If it's easier, you can give me a project that you thought was good in the first place and then turned out worse than expected, but I'd rather hear the first question that I asked, if you have an example of that.
I cannot think of a specific example. I mean, I know they're there in my head. I guarantee they're there in my head, but I'm not thinking of one. But I will say that when I was on the Planning Commission, I had some ideas like, okay, everything should be articulated and no two-story walls and big setbacks, right? These are good. And if you don't have these things, it's less good, right? And so there were projects that got built and I said, wow, I really like that two-story wall. Like I like the simplicity of that design. You know, I thought it was going to be a big stucco box, but the design has a lot of integrity. And I like the two-story walls because they put in really nice windows. So, you know, they have a focal point in this sea of very plain, you know, space. So when you look at those things in a drawing, sometimes you think, okay, that's going to be really jarring. But then when it's designed, there's other things that are not visible in the drawing that are there on the site, like an excellent landscape. Like I said, excellent windows, high quality materials, total integrity in the design. Like every element has a function and there's nothing kind of pasted on and is just sort of this ornament. And so those simple designs often don't look good on paper, and yet they can execute incredibly well. And so I guess that's, you know, now as I'm talking, I'm thinking of examples. Ultra modern designs are not my thing. And when I saw them, I would think, oh, I don't know about this standing seam metal roof thing. But it met the zoning codes and it was in scale with everything else. It gets approved. And then after it's built, it's, you know, really quite an asset to the neighborhood. So that's my example.
Thank you. Councilmember Lee Ing.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I got my answers in a lot of the responses she gave, so I can pass and we can stay on schedule.
Okay, Ms. Disney, do you have any questions for us?
Not at this time, but I thank you for letting me come in at this weird time. I had another meeting and I had to pop out. And anyway, I'm really sorry that I wasn't here at like my schedule.
No, that's entirely our fault. We went, we had a couple people from the beginning who did not come. And so it threw our schedule off and we were rocketing through and put you in an uncomfortable position. And we apologize for that. And we're glad that you rejoined us at your scheduled time as you had committed to do. So thank you very much for that.
All right. Thank you so much.
Have a good evening. And I think we have Ms. Coe available.
Yes, and there she is.
I'm here.
Great. And so not knowing how long you've been with us, I will just recap really quickly. We give you a minute or so to tell us why you are applying for this commission. And then we'll go around among the 5 council members and ask you questions. And then at the end, ask you if you want to ask us any questions, you're welcome to do that and make a wrap-up statement.
Okay, that sounds great. I did see a couple of the previous interviews, so I get the gist of what's happening. I have to apologize. I have COVID right now, so my brain is a little bit on the foggy side, and if I start coughing, that's why. But I really wanted to be here, so
and we really want you to take care of yourself. So if it gets to where this isn't working, you please just signal us. All right.
I will. Thanks. No, I think I'll be fine. I actually feel like I'm on the upswing now, so it's a good thing. As you can tell by my my application, I was born here, and so I have a very deep sense of history and affection and love for the city that I was raised in. And I think that is what drew me in general to the Historical Commission. I am at this point in my life, my children, my 2 sons are now adults, and I wouldn't say quite flown yet, but we're working on that. And and I'm working part-time, and I've been reinventing myself, and so participating in city government in my city has always been very attractive to me, and I've always been kind of disappointed that I haven't had time for it. So now that I have time, I'm looking to enter into that mix, and I realize I come into this discussion as a rank newbie, and I noticed a couple of the other 2 gentlemen that I watched obviously know a lot more than I do about housing and historical housing and that sort of thing. But I'm also a very fast learner, and so that's really the basis of my interest. And I also find that I have a real passion for letting people know who live in this city what the history is, because it's so rich. And we have a lot of people who have come in who are very new and maybe not even from this country. And to instill that sense of history, or at least an awareness, I think is really important, and is something I would really like to participate in.
You're muted, Mayor.
Trying to be respectful and keep muting myself. My apologies. So have you had a chance to look at either a commission meeting or work plan? Is there some part of that that particularly speaks to you, or is there a hole in the plan that you think you'd like to fill? What would you like to work on if you were appointed to this commission?
I think I am interested in the historical housing. I have a sense that there might be a little bit of social science needed when it comes to working with people, the residents, and particularly new residents, if they find themselves into an historical home. And while I agree with the carrot and the stick kind of analogy, the again, that sense of helping people to understand the history that they're sitting on, that would enable them to make decisions in that regard, I think would be really helpful. And so I think in that particular area, I would see that as a role, as looking at, who we're trying to convince, or who might be a possibility of a house, and then really working with them to come up with a plan that works for us and for them. Hopefully that's doable. And then also, I have been looking at working with the historical museum and also with government agencies. I like to be, in all my previous work, I like to bring things together and bring people together. And so working with outside agencies in a way that that works toward a goal and builds on what our mutual goals are is something I very much enjoy doing. And so working with like, for instance, the museum, I love the museum. And unfortunately, I've wanted to work with them for many years. I have many photos that they probably would love to have from the 40s and 50s. But so I think I would like to find ways with them to really increase the sense of history throughout Los Altos and of our history. And I see the museum as obviously a great purveyor of that. And I would like to help those kinds of efforts.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Coe, for being with us tonight and for applying to the commission. In your opinion, how much deference should be given to the desires of a homeowner when determining whether or not a property should be designated historical?
Oh boy, that's tough. I think, again, I would really hope that through discussion and working with that homeowner, we could help them what is it? Again, my brain. Be respectful and knowledgeable and want to participate in the history of the city. And so I think obviously working with them, sitting down and talking with them, I think it has to be the bottom line is it has to be attractive to them in some way. And whether that be the emotional side of, I want to do something for the city, there's a strong sense of history, all the way to, if we do this, then I can do this to my house kind of thing. And I like the previous candidate talking about mitigating and how can we make that process and make the requirements of having that home become a historic place. How can we mitigate the problems and emphasize what the positives are that would come out of it? And maybe that's carrots, I don't know, but it's because just going and insisting and strong arming a resident into, say, well, your home's a historical place and that's the way it's going to be, I think would not be advisable unless it was really, really necessary, because I think it sets a bad precedent and a bad tone for the city.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Coe, for being here tonight, especially when you're not feeling well. We all appreciate that. So I didn't grow up here, so I'm always impressed when someone says that they did, because I can just imagine the childhood and the apricots in the fields. But I belong to the group, I think it's, you're from Los Altos on Facebook, right? And I belong to the similar group from where I grew up on the East Coast. And both lament the same things, basically. This beautiful building's now a Pizza Hut, or whatever.
Right.
But you've been here your whole life. Can you give us an example of a piece of what Los Altos has done right, and what you can look at as a native of Los Altos and say, boy, I'm sure glad that we did that?
I think the Main Street and State Street, I think, look really good. And I think they are in keeping with the history. They have the smaller town feel. I think some of the ornamentation and the lampposts and things like that, I think kind of bespeak the history. And I've been really pleased with that. Even the Gore Point on State in Maine that has the clock in it, I think is really cool. I like that. I worry about First Street with the high rises, higher buildings going in. And I'm hoping that when those come to fruition, somehow the design is still going to be evocative of a smaller town rather than another El Camino. And so that would be a concern that I have. I think Los Altos and what we've done in like Hillview and Shoup and places like that, I think has made me feel really proud to live here. And I mean, I've hung around Hillview all my life, so it has changed a lot, obviously, since then, but they've been good changes. And so so I think I'm most interested in having a respect for the history. I don't think we necessarily need to look like it did in the 1950s, and going back to dirt roads would not be a good thing. So that I think the city has done quite a bit in that I've really thought was great in terms of being able to grow as a city and be functional in the 20 whatever century we're in at this point. And there's a couple areas of concern, but I think overall the way the city has approached and stayed true to that small town feel, I've very much appreciated as time has gone on.
Thank you. Councilmember Lee Eng.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to pass because I know that you've done a good job answering the other questions, and knowing that you're ill, I just want you to rest.
Oh, thank you.
Councilmember Flagger.
Thank you, and thanks, Ms. Coe, for making the time and applying and wanting to serve the community. And sorry to hear about your COVID positive test. I hope your recovery is quick and you have mild symptoms.
Thank you.
So my question, Ms. Coe, will be quick. I'm just curious. I'm happy to hear you want to get more involved in the community. I'm just curious how you heard about the commission applications, the historical commission application process.
Well, it was definitely on the web, and how did I see it? Yes, because I've been involved recently in the Cuesta Calming project and with the Complete Streets Commission. And so I believe the historical committee, though it wasn't brought up obviously within the context of what's happening on Cuesta, but I became aware of it through that and the way of the broader scope of the different committees that exist in the city. And of course, I've also always been aware of the museum. And so I kind of started fishing around and became more aware of the historical commission and went, wow, that would be so cool. So that's really how I got started in it.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I hope you feel better soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And do you have any questions for us?
I guess not really at this point. I feel like I should have questions, and I probably do, but coming up with them right now is kind of hard. I very much appreciate your consideration of taking a newbie into the fold. And I hope that that might be something. I realize I might be kind of a risk, but I hope that that might be okay. So I think I am intrigued also in what there's been a lot of discussion, and I don't want to turn this into a long thing because I realize you guys are tired too. But when it comes down to conflict between the state and the city, in general, does the state win out? I mean, is there any negotiation with the state, or is it?
Let's see, I'm going to try and answer that in about 2 sentences.
Perfect.
When there's a state law that's very clear that it takes precedence, then they win.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are sometimes things that we have some flexibility about. And then there's policy decisions about how we want to exercise that flexibility that can possibly slightly alter or take advantage of areas where the state doesn't have just black and white.
Got
So
it.
that's the short version.
Yeah, the federal government works the same way. So
yeah, I'm sure you experienced that. I know you worked for NASA Ames, so
yeah.
yes.
And I'm also quite experienced at writing grant proposals and being on both sides of that. So I noticed somebody earlier had mentioned the importance of finding grants, and that's something that I am really experienced with in the federal arena, certainly. And hopefully some of that would be transferable to the city.
Great. Thank you very much. And do take care of yourself and take it easy. Long COVID is a bad thing. So
yeah.
Get yourself better and avoid that, and have a good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you all.
Okay. So sometimes we talk about these and sometimes we don't. My preference for tonight would be, because we have open question on candidacy, that we not have conversations at this point until we get clarification from our city manager. I see some heads going up and down, so I'm going to take that as concurrence from my colleagues, and thank everyone who has been here for the interviews, everyone who's been here listening to the interviews. And we will let you know, I don't believe this is on our calendar for the September 6th meeting. So I think it'll be on the meeting of the, 23rd, that we will have discussions and make decisions about these selections. And then we will be in touch with you. You do not have to be at the meeting. You don't have to be present to win. So a city clerk will let you know the outcomes of those deliberations and decisions. With that,
Madam Mayor?
Yes, please, Mr. Weinberg.
I'm sorry. I think actually commission appointments are on our September 6th.
Is it our September 6th meeting?
I think they are.
Agenda. We were going back and forth about it, and I haven't looked at the final one.
I believe I saw it today. I could be mistaken, but I think they were there.
Okay.
Did we ever get clarity on our first interviewee?
Our first interviewee was a note. He did not return any of my calls, and did not reach out to let us know he had an issue or with meeting his time slot. So I don't know what happened.
So we don't know what happened with number 1. We do know that number 2 withdrew.
That's correct. And I'll also confirm that September 6th does have the commission appointment.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you for that, Mr. Weinberg. And so I think we can move to item number 2 on our agenda. This is the result. Let's see, back up. We've talked a little about this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the history, but you all know that the Stanford University has a development plan. 3+ years ago, they came forward to the county with a proposed new plan. I was one of the people who testified at the city council meeting about that, and that plan was ultimately withdrawn by Stanford. There's now other stuff going on with respect to what's going to happen with their future development. Some of that is a little bit integrated and concerned also with what the county is doing, of course, with respect to their own planning. And one of the most important things that came out of what happened 3 years ago was that suddenly people woke up and said, oops, it's not just Palo Alto that gets affected by what Stanford University does. And the other cities that are affected by Stanford in various ways, Redwood City, Palo Alto, Menlo Park, Los Altos, number of jurisdictions, the county of San Mateo, were brought together by Supervisor Simidian, because he represents, of course, this district where Stanford is, and began meeting to talk about the impacts and watching what was happening with respect to future development proposals and so on. Councilmember Flagger has joined me at those meetings, and we are Brown acted together now on the whole issue of Stanford development proposals. We were at a meeting last week with respect to a proposal and county potential action. This is now going to come to the County Planning Commission. Excuse me. Yes, planning or housing? Which one? No, planning's first, then housing. And so we concluded it would be a good idea to get a letter in. Councilmember Flagger was good enough to draft the letter, and that is what is in your packet. If you approve this letter, and assuming that there were not substantive changes from Planning Commission before this went forward to housing, and then from there onward to the Board of Supervisors, we would repeat the letter for the Housing Committee as well as for the Board of Supervisors. Were there to be changes, you would have the option to give Councilmember Flagger and I the authority to make changes and revise the letter and send it onward in those two subsequent hearings. So I'm going to turn it over now. Councilmember Flagger, have I forgotten anything that matters for this purpose?
No.
Okay.
I mean, we're going to have discussion and then, yeah.
Yeah, so we are going to have discussion, and if there were to be any public comment on this item, we should ask if there are is anyone from the community that wants to comment on this. And again, the letter was in the packet.
Members of the community, if you'd like to address the council on this letter, please raise your hand. Mayor, I see no one with their hands raised.
Right, but I see that Councilmember Weinberg has his up, so we'll take him first.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two questions for, I guess, you're not a subcommittee, but for the two of you. The first is, if Stanford has withdrawn their development plan, what's the purpose of the letter?
So I can jump in. So the general use permit, the GUP, that's the process that got stopped 2 years ago. This is a separate process because remember, Stanford is still governed under the County of Santa Clara. So this is what's called a community plan update that governs Stanford's development. So this is, although mention is made of the GUP, this is actually a separate process. So even though they withdrew that permit amendment from the process, they still have to comply with the community update plan that is managed by the county.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And then specifically looking at the first bullet point about halfway down, we're objecting to removing trip-based standards from the circulation chapter. I wasn't quite sure what that means. Is that an objection to moving away from level of service to VMT? Or is that something else that's going on?
It's something else that's going on. There is a specific requirement as to how Stanford measures or how the county measures traffic at Stanford. And Stanford had proposed as part of to go back to the GUP, Stanford had proposed as part of the GUP to change how that was measured, and they'd like to do that again. And we're saying, no, that's the short version.
Got it. Thank you.
Vice
Mayor,
Mayor.
I'm ready to make the motion.
Vice Mayor had her hand up.
Yeah, sorry, it was my real rather than virtual hand. So if I'm understanding the letter correctly, we are asking, this letter is asking for the same things that staff is recommending to county anyway, correct? So we're entirely consistent with these 3 points.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
So Councilmember Flagger, were you going to make a motion?
I was going to make a motion. I move that we approve and delegate authority to the mayor to execute this letter and forward it on to the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors Planning Commission and any other Santa Clara County body that will hear this matter, and also delegate authority to the mayor to make changes to this letter that still fall within the intent of this letter before the council.
And do I have a second? Councilmember Lee Eng?
I'd be glad to second that motion.
Thank you very much. City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yes, members of the council, if you agree with the motion on the table, please indicate so by answering in the affirmative. Councilmember Lee Eng.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Flagger.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Weinberg.
Yes.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Meadows.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Enander.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. That concludes the agendized business for this evening. And there being no further appropriate business, we are adjourned at 8:47. Thank you all.